Welcome back to Wine and the Word. I'm Pastor Matthew, here with Pastor Peter.
Pastor Peter, hello.
We're so glad that you're here joining us, whether you're at a coffee shop or someone's home, around conversation and some time to check in once again this month. We have something a little bit different this month. We hosted Todd Bolsinger, who is a local, or not a local, he's a California-based author who wrote a book called Canoeing the Mountains. He's a professor at Fuller Theological Seminary and led a conference here at St. Andrew for a group of church leaders and volunteers and staff all around.
325 people, it was great. Yep.
Yeah, all around kind of what is adaptive change. So,
Yeah, so we thought we would do a little joint dialogue here together about that conference, about the concept, about adaptive change, how our faith can lead us forward with a sense of purpose and future, even though things around us are changing too. And so we thought we'd do a little talking about that. So first of all, like Matthew said here, Todd Bolsinger and the Canoeing the Mountains was the conference that we had, and it's the parable or the image around it is the Louisiana Purchase. So that was when 200 years ago or so. I did a little Wikipedia research before we sat down. $12 million.
Wow.
For 800 square miles. Of course, covering the whole swath of the United States was, of course, the best deal in the world.
They got that land cheap.
We got that land really cheap from the French. But anyway, Thomas Jefferson said that this land needs to be explored, right? And so Lewis and Clark then were hired, and anybody who's written a sixth grade paper like I did on Lewis and Clark learned that they got in their boats and they made their way up the Missouri River to explore. And they were boaters. They had planned on exploring by boat. So
they had been trained with keel boats and built their own keel boats and put this whole crew together who could explore across waterways, right?
Exactly. Water was their deal. That's how they did stuff. But then they get to the headwaters of the Missouri River, up in the Midwest here. And what do they have to do then if they haven't completed their mission? They have to get out of their boats. They have to cross the great Rocky Mountains. So they had to what? They had to adapt. Yeah. They had to figure out who it was. And so Todd was here doing this conference for these people, using that image, that parable there, to talk about what it means to lead and to be Christian leaders in a changing time. And there are lots of changes that are happening all around us. Matthew, that really...
And I remember one of the images that Todd used when he was here last month is he talked about how Lewis and Clark got to a local tribe who they said, we're here, we're traveling all the way across North America looking for passage to the Pacific Northwest. There's a waterway and we're gonna find it. And the natives said, there's mountains up there and you have canoes.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
And as Todd explained it, Lewis and Clark said, well, we're Virginians. We know mountains. We can figure out how to carry canoes over these mountains. And of course, the Native Americans were dumbfounded at their confidence. But they had to let things go.
They
right?
did. So they had to listen to the Native Americans. They had to follow their guidance and change their systems and normal routines to make it a successful mission. And so when we think about changes, in your small groups, you can talk about the changes that we've seen. You thought of a good one too about the study about
and I think the image that Todd uses too is this that the church was prepared for a different sort of environment, right? That the church that both Peter and I grew up in, and that probably all of you understood, assumed that there was this cultural assumption that people went to church. Right? Yeah. That you would meet not only your family at church, your extended family, your cousins, your aunts and uncles, and your grandparents, but you might probably meet your boss at church. And on Monday morning, there might be a check-in who said, "I didn't see you at church on Sunday morning," and some social pressure put upon that. And this is what we do as a community. But now, as we see in the rise of the nuns in the world, not the NUNS,
But the
NONES,
Yeah, exactly.
right? The
yeah,
people
yeah.
who mark nothing on their religious survey.
Yep.
That's the fastest growing religion in the world and in
Yep.
the U.S.
Yep.
especially. That people mark none,
Mm-hmm.
and some of that is because we have not been prepared for the world that we see in front of us. We've
right.
been canoeing
Right.
across these waterways, and somehow we see mountains. And so, what does
Yep.
it mean to let go of some of those canoes?
Exactly.
Not let go of who we are.
Who we are, to
but,
trust in who. Yeah, that's right.
But to let go of some of the ways that we've learned how to be the church,
Exactly.
in order to find the adventure that God is calling us forth in.
Exactly. So that was what the 325 people did at the conference, was really lean into what it means to be anchored, to be faithful, to trust God, to be purposeful, moving forward. But the definition of insanity is, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, or people talk about the church and say, well, why are there fewer people, or why are there no millennials, or why is the mainline Protestant church showing signs of decline? And we know in a lot of statistical categories, the Protestant church in many places, not everywhere, but in many places is declining. Yeah. And so how does one take our values and move them forward into a changing world? And we know that's also a challenge for all of us,
right.
Too. That the issue of adaptive change. How am I going to be an effective pastor? How am I going to be an effective father? How am I going to be, a almost 50 person now that's living robustly in the world around me when I want to engage in an active way the world that I live in, rather than stay in my own little 70s and 80s shell that I was raised in. I'm constantly reminded that it's not 1976 anymore. In other words, when I was a kid kind of growing up into things, and what does that mean for me, and how do I develop myself in those ways?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there are probably countless examples in the world that each of you live in, right? I mean,
aren't there though?
If we look at business, or if we look at even the cell phones that are in our pockets, right? I mean,
we both have them right here, right?
Are more powerful than the computers that I grew up with, and can reach information in an instant. And how does that change? Not only our access to information, but who we are as people. I mean, that's the reality. I see sometimes on the internet articles about millennials, and of course I tune up as your resident millennial pastor on staff. But they're often saying like, oh, millennials are killing napkins, for example, because they're not buying napkins anymore. They use paper towels for all of their needs.
What is the world coming to?
What is the world coming to?
It's
Millennials
ending.
have killed something again, or
Right.
killing things left and right. But underneath each of those articles is an assumption that if we just do things the same way, then we'll be a successful company.
We'll be a successful
company. If we sell the same napkins for a generation and a half.
Well, when I think about how we shop differently, sure, I can go to Target, but now I don't have to say hello to a cashier anymore because I can do a self-checkout. Yeah. If I even want to go to Target, because I can have Target bring me my groceries too. Or I can go to Amazon and take care of all that stuff. Coffee shops didn't exist almost 5 years ago. Right. How many times do I get together with people in coffee shops today? So things are evolving and changing. Many are good. I'm not scared about many things, but many of them are also challenging. Do I agree? Do I like these things? What is that? What is it? That's true for all of us, I think. Yeah.
And that there's a process of letting go of things, there are pieces that I miss of the simplicity of life, before the instant communication was at our fingertips. So, as we reflect on what this looks for our church, your leaders, your pastors, your church council leaders are doing this work. But it's also a work of all of ours of the church to think about how are we preparing this community, St. Andrew Lutheran Church here in Eden Prairie, or if you're visiting us from another church, your church community. What does it look like to look at the context that we're in, and look at the ways that we've done things in the past, and look at those and say, what things are core to who we are that we will never lose? And maybe there's this new sense of cherishing those core things. But outside of those things, what pieces can we let go?
Right.
What pieces, because Lewis and Clark didn't lose their adventure or their spirit of exploration.
And they succeeded.
Eventually. In their goal.
Exactly. Yep.
But they had to let go of some of the strategies that they had come up with. It reminds me of this story in the Bible of Jesus appearing to the disciples in the Gospel of John after he's risen, and the disciples are out fishing. And they just can't catch any fish, right? I mean, this week has been awful. Their teacher, their leader, the person who they've come to rely on has died. Everything that they had believed in was up in question, and they're just trying to get a meal. But Jesus appears to them on the beach, waving. And at a fire pit. And it's just so tangible the way that Jesus appears in this story. But he calls out to them and says, why don't you try tossing your nets on the other side of the boat?
Just switch to the other side.
Just
throw it on the right side of the boat, which is what I think the passage is. Throw it on the right side of the boat, and you can take that in both ways, either the right side or the right and wrong side. You know, I love that. It's a fun play in there.
Toss your net on the other side, and as the story goes, they can't even get all of the fish into the boat, and then the fish are so large that they have to drag them in.
Like 156, right?
Yeah, there's that number, 156 fish,
which they can't really decide. Scholars
don't
even know what is
150.
You can try to numerology it down to, but it's just a lot.
It's a lot of
fish.
That's
all it is.
Just a lot
incredible
of fish.
Harvest of fish
Abundance.
from the abundance of fish.
And then Jesus sits down and says, "Let's have breakfast." And I think there's some freshness in that, in thinking about what are the things in our lives that we can look at and say these are core to who we are, and to spend time in taking stock at them, in the ways that we do things, and then what new imagination are we called into?
Right.
And in your conversations this week, I think I invite you to think about it on a number of different levels. Right. You can think about it on that personal level of what are the things that I do, what are the important things for me as a human being, or in your family unit or in your household. But then to think about it more in our church scale of what as a church community are the things that are most valuable to us? What are the things that really ground our purpose and our identity? And for each of you to name those things,
I think
is a powerful exercise.
I think so too.
Then finally more on kind of a vocational or a societal scale of what are the ways that we need to learn how to navigate as a society today.
How do we? I was thinking too about how do we take who we are as unique and gifted, faithful people? How do we transform ourselves for the communities into which now we live? Our church community as it lives out in Eden Prairie or wherever your church is, as I need to relate to the changing world around me. How do I take who I am and adapt that, relate it, share it, be who I am? How do I talk to people who don't maybe talk in the language that I may be uncomfortable talking or being? What does it mean for me to be in relationship with people today, people that I know, new people that I need to meet or work with. I think it's that. How do I adapt? How can I adapt to be as a church, as a person, as a husband and a father in the world?
And it
today.
involves listening, and it involves slowing down and taking stock, and all of those practices. So,
and I think you guys will come up with some thoughts on a really big and broad subject about navigating and adapting to change around us. So
thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us
for Wine and the Word this month. We pray that your conversations are rich and that your check-ins are good, and we look forward to hearing from you.